Hi friends, grateful you're here. Despite slipping into the slumpiest slump, I do in fact have a wrap up for y'all. Not gonna lie to you, I kind of forgot how to do a reading wrap up. It's been a long time. In May, I read a total of, drumroll please, one single book. I went to the Catskills with my family and I took Acts of Desperation by Nolan. I was like, this will be a fun read. I feel like it'll be low stakes enough where I can just like slip in and out of it while I'm here with my family. And it was an absolutely delicious read. It was one of those experiences where you just like completely lose yourself in the obsession that your characters are going through. I just thoroughly enjoyed it. So Acts of Desperation is a story about a woman who meets this man and promptly is like, I like him, I'm gonna pursue him, falls into this like obsession with him, and then it sort of recounts how like obsessive love can obliterate the self, how she sort of erased herself within that partnership. And it wasn't even a partnership that was like nurturing. It was very noxious and sort of like siphoned from her. We saw how she's folded herself up and made herself small in order to fit into this very like kind of toxic relationship. We saw her start to thrash against the walls that she helped to erect in that relationship. It was just very fascinating. I keep saying that this book is like if Annie Ernaux and Sally Rooney had a baby and that baby was nannied by Gwendolyn Riley, that would be Acts of Desperation. I thought there were some insights that were really sharp in a very Ernaux way. The sort of structure of the relationship felt very Rooney-esque, and then the toxicity was just like totally Gwendolyn Riley. The London Review had a perfect little descriptor of Acts of Desperation. They said, subject to I don't know how to say this name. Kieran? Subject to Kieran's moods and casual cruelty, the woman begins to split apart. On the one hand, she knows she must do whatever she can to keep his love. On the other hand, she knows something isn't right. That these two ideas can hum along in tandem may seem odd, but anyone who has been in an all-consuming relationship will recognize this duality. I think if you're wanting something that's very... It wasn't fever dream-esque, but I definitely found myself like exactly alongside the character in like the throes of obsession. Our character was also a little bit self-destructive, so to see her try to assert agency and grasp onto her own sense of self was interesting because she was so eager to fold into this relationship. Enjoyed not only the book but the experience that it lent to. I intended for it to be a book where I would just like sneak away and read a little bit of it and then come back, but it was one that I had to like force myself to like resurface from. I remember like waking up at 2 o'clock in the morning just like needing to know what happens with these characters. Those kinds of reading experiences, I feel like I don't experience them as much anymore, and so whenever I do come across them, I'm just like so thankful. She's coming out with another one in November, and I don't know what it's about, but I'm absolutely so eager to check out what else Nolan is up to. So the second book I read, not in May, sometime in June, was Pew by Catherine Lacey. This was a great book. So in Pew, we have this character who walks a bunch of miles and ends up in a church. They fall asleep in a church pew. This family takes them in and allows them to shelter within their home. As the story goes on, we start to see the people who surround Pew question their gender, question their race. Pew is racially ambiguous. Some people are like, well, no, they're white, and some people are like, they're absolutely black. And then the questions around gender, they present pretty ambiguously. Everyone is so obsessed with pinning down what exactly Pew is. What was interesting in this is that the sort of obsession around whether Pew is a man or a woman becomes almost caricature. It feels so absurd to like perseverate on. Pew even questions this. It's just like, this is just a vessel. It's just a body. Like it doesn't warrant all of these things. And I think the interesting thing that Catherine Lacey explored in this was the sort of difference that exists between needing to define someone and understanding someone, and how those are completely dissimilar. And oftentimes in society, we need to define in order to like apply our heuristics and all of the baggage that comes with the ideas that we ascribe to certain people, but very little people are trying to understand us. But generally speaking, it's just a really interesting, that piece of it, that was really compelling to me. And then there was like this build up towards what I thought was going to be human sacrifice. I was absolutely convinced it was going to be human sacrifice, but it was not human sacrifice. There was this build up to this thing that happened in the end, and I think I became, oh, that's interesting. I see what she did there. I became so obsessed with defining what it was that was going to happen that I sort of not came out of the story, but I just needed to define what was going on. So I guess now in reflection, that's kind of cool. For me, the beginning was a little bit stronger, perhaps because I was able to cast my judgments onto others. But then as I was trying to figure out what exactly was happening, it sort of pulled me out of the story. And I think it might have been sort of a tool that Catherine Lacey was employing in this. Yeah, it was a trip. It was an experience, and I thought it was a cool read. Okay, then I read After the Winter by our girl Lupe. This was so interesting. This was so different from Stillborn. I think it's cool. I think it's cool when writers have such range. But this was about two characters. It was about Claudio, who is a Cuban who lives in New York, and Cecilia, who is a Mexican who lives in Paris. We're sort of hearing from them one after the other. And then eventually their storylines merge and they meet and they intermingle and then they split. Claudio is a man who is so bound to control. He needs to control everything. He is very like meticulous and measured and only values like things that are controlled. Whereas Cecilia, I don't think they're foils exactly, but Cecilia is a little bit wandering. She is doing her dissertation. She lives in this apartment by herself, and we sort of get a sense of both of these characters, Claudia and Cecilia's loneliness. It's interesting because the apartments become characters themselves, and I don't think I've seen that. I think that most of the people that I know today are bound to the walls of their apartment. Their apartments are very big parts of their lives, but I haven't seen that become like a character in a book, and it's really interesting to see that happen here. But yeah, we see them sort of grapple with their loneliness. We see their stories and how they've related to partners in the past, and how then when they meet, they do become entwined romantically. Cecilia goes along with Claudio's interest in her, and Claudio is just taken by his projection of what he believes a woman should be and what he believes Cecilia is, but not really who Cecilia is. They're falling in love with these ideas of people as opposed to like the actual person. And then what I think is really interesting, and I think what Guadalupe is trying to explore, is how oftentimes when we are in love, the actual act of loving someone is such a small piece of the whole love story. In Claudio and Cecilia's relationship, a lot of what we see is their distance. So they are long distance, as Claudio lives in New York and Cecilia lives in Paris, and we see them grow their relationship through this email correspondence. Cecilia had been in a relationship with her neighbor Tom, and he sort of leaves, and we see a short burst of a love event, but then we see her longing for Tom, and we see her questioning what Tom could be doing. And so it's like the existence of love in the absence of it, and I thought that was really very interesting. Something that I think a lot of the books that I picked up were exploring was this idea of like nothing gold can stay. A lot of the relationships just so quickly tarnished and became something else. I think that's the thing that is like missing for me in romance books, is that I'm not so much interested in happy endings. I'm interested in the realistic passages of love, and I think a lot of the times, unfortunately, love is experienced in the plume that comes after. If we're thinking about direct or indirect, it's like most of it happens in like indirect spaces, or like I don't know how to describe it, but it definitely felt like a book about longing and a book about yearning and a book about how oftentimes the experience of love is not necessarily the actual like when the two people are together, but instead it tends to be around the absences of a person missing another person, the longing, the loss. That's sort of where a lot of our time and space within love ends up happening. And I thought that was really interesting. So for that, I thought it was a really fascinating look at love. I just really hated Claudio. I think it's interesting because I think I can get on with like women characters that are unlikable, but when I have to sit through a book with an unlikable dude character, I sort of felt that with Casa de los Espíritus, House of the Spirit by Isabel Allende. I hated Esteban, and I hated that we had to be with him from the first page to the last. And I kind of felt that with this too, but I thought what it was exploring was really very interesting. Not like my favorite book, but I'm not mad that I read it. Next, I read Things I Don't Want to Know by Deborah Levy. Okay, beginning of this, I really very much enjoyed. Her writing reminds me so much of Ali Smith's writing in that the construction, the form, the style is all very playful, and I enjoy that a lot. And I think as it became more like memoir-y, I started to lose the thread a bit. Also though, I would read this before bed, and that could have totally contributed to the fact that I wasn't crazy about it. Yeah, it was okay. There were some parts that I really enjoyed. Like I really enjoyed when she was talking about her time in Mallorca, and I have some underlines, but You know what? I'm gonna reread this one. I might add this to my summer TBR because I think I didn't give it the chance it deserved. It was just like, there was one part where she was in South Africa. Something about it rubbed me kind of wrong. But I'm going to reread it because I think there were parts that I really did enjoy. And I think I might also buy the seasonal quartet from Ali Smith because so similar and brought me like the same feelings of joy that I felt with reading that. I just never finished it because it was slow moving. I think when you're like interested in language, there's a slower propulsion for moving through the text. I think I just have to be more disciplined, and so I will be picking that up. I'm going to read this one again, so putting a pin in like my thoughts about it. But as of now, I'm just like meh. Okay, and then the last book that I have read, I just finished this last night, The Pisces by Melissa Broder. Baby, this was so enjoyable. I recently went to Miami and I was like, I need a book that I can like read on the plane, won't be too heavy. I'm reading Chain Gang All-Stars as well, and I was like, I can't. First of all, the size of that book is massive, but I was like, I need something that's a little bit lighter. The only thing I had heard about this book was just woman meets mermaid, falls in love, has lots of sex. And I was like, that sounds like a perfect Miami book. And it was. This book is about a woman with an anxious attachment. Just kidding, but like not really. I feel like everyone in this book just had like anxious attachments, but this woman is in a relationship, and at first she's exploring sort of how when she has dominion over a person, she kind of loses interest, and when a person is not secured in her grasp, that's when she finds them most interesting. And so she's like thinking back to her own relationship with her long-term boyfriend, and she's like, you know, I don't even really find him attractive and not sure why I'm with him. She sort of brings it up and she's like, I think we should maybe take a break. And he's like, you know what, that's not a bad idea. And she's like, wait. And so then they break up and mayhem ensues. So in order to heal from her breakup, she goes to Venice Beach to stay in her sister's very fancy home and care for their dog. She assaults her ex and is mandated to group counseling, and so she meets all of these characters who are love and sex obsessed. They're like in Love and Affection Anonymous or something, some group like that. All of these women trying to figure out how to live a life outside of the obsessions of like desire. Lucy is off to the rocks. She's sitting on the rocks near the beach and she meets this swimmer dude and they kind of connect, and between all this, Lucy's on Tinder and she's having lots of escapades and less than ideal encounters and rendezvous. So again, she's meeting this guy on the rocks. His name is Theo and she meets him a couple of times. Long story short, Theo is a mermaid and her and Theo have a thing together. It sounds ridiculous. It sounds like something that's very fantastical, but it was so good. It was so funny. I think the explorations around like power dynamics in love, but also in codependence was very interesting to read. Also very like existential. She constantly was calling upon this like void, her nothingness. What would fill that void, and if there was something that could fill it. This also fit into the nothing gold can stay sort of theme, in that the reason or the obsession was so encompassing for Lucy because it wasn't possible. It was just interesting to see someone who was constantly chasing things that were like kind of unhealthy. Also, it was just very interesting when there were like sort of like explicit scenes. There's a lot of gender bending in her experiences of something that might have been really binary, and I thought that was really cool. Yeah, there was one line, as we kissed I imagine eating his tail with garlic butter. So it was very like of consumption and blurring the lines around binaries in these like dynamics, but also really focusing on power differentials and dynamics. I don't know, it was a really fascinating read. It was like very funny and very light, but also fake deep, but kind of not. I don't know, it was just like a trip. I really enjoyed this book. It ended kind of on a cliffhanger, and I'm curious, like I want more of this world, but maybe I don't need it. Maybe it's fine just being what it was. But yeah, I thought this was really enjoyable. Read Hot, I keep wanting to say Hot Milk, it's not Hot Milk. Milk Fed. I read Milk Fed on audio, and that was a book that I had to try a couple of times to get into, but I kind of want to reread it physically because I think there's something about just reading her and holding her that's really enjoyable. But this was just so much fun. This is such a good summer book. If you haven't read this one, I definitely recommend as like a nice beach read. But yeah, a lot of books on longing and yearning, this idea that nothing gold can stay, which is kind of cool. I'm enjoying it. I think it's a good way to balance how exploring romance is, like the anti-romance book. But yeah, those are the books that I read in May and June. Slow start, but it ended up ramping up towards June. I'm grateful. I think the Pisces really knocked me out of my reading slump, and I feel like I'm back, I'm ready. I'm excited to tackle summer reading. Not tackle, just like joyfully and blissfully wade into summer reading. Let me know if you've read any of the books that I've mentioned. You can bully me about the Deborah Levy book. I'll allow it. But yeah, let me know how you're doing. I think that's it. Bye.